Harold has lived one of the most amazing lives of any survivor of the Great War of 2077. He's lived for hundreds of years, traveled thousands of miles, appeared in 3 canonical Fallout games, and many other non-canonical or partially canonical Fallout games. He has been described simultaneously as a ghoul and an FEV mutant, which makes understanding his exact nature hard to pin down. To understand Harold's odyssey spanning so many years, we start at the beginning, in the year 2161, during the events of Fallout 1. We find Harold in the hub. At this point in his life, he's a beggar.
Spare change, old friend, old pal? Can you help a poor mutant down on his luck?
Harold was born before the bombs dropped and survived the apocalypse in a vault. Vault 29.
After the Great War, my vault was one of the first to open. Phew, long time.
There's a lot about Harold's early life that we only know about thanks to the Fallout Bible. The Fallout Bible was released by one of Fallout 2's designers, Chris Avallone, on the Black Isle website in 2002. Since then, it has been compiled and released with some published versions of Fallouts 1, 2, and Fallout Tactics. At the time, it was written to summarize the Fallout timeline and flesh out much of Fallout's world building to prepare for the canceled Van Buren project, which was going to be Black Isle Studios' Fallout 3, before it was canceled. After Bethesda took over the Fallout franchise, Chris Avallone declared that the Fallout Bible was no longer canon. However, since then, Bethesda has dipped into the Fallout Bible from time to time when establishing lore for subsequent Fallout games, which means that some of what's in the Fallout Bible is canonical and some isn't. Now for Harold, there's a lot about his life that isn't described in any of the games, which means we only know about it because of the Fallout Bible. So until any of this information is proven to be uncanonical by subsequent Fallout games, in my opinion, I think we can assume this biographical information did indeed happen, which means that Harold was born in the year 2070, and he was only 5 when the bombs dropped in 2077.
All started with the sirens. I was young, but I do remember that. A lot of terrible years followed.
He was sheltered away in Vault 29, where he spent his formative years. Vault 29 doesn't appear in any of the published Fallout games. We never get to actually physically explore it. However, in Fallout 76, we find a holotape in Vault-Tec University that tells us that Vault 29 was filled with teenagers.
At this rate, I'm gonna end up shipped out to the West Coast to work as a janitor in 29 with a bunch of obnoxious rich teenagers or something.
And this information coincides with what we know about Vault 29 from the Fallout Bible, which describes it as a vault for children only under the age of 15. On the day of Armageddon, their parents were separated from them, although some design specs for the vault mentioned that some adults were allowed, but only if they were terminally ill and likely to die soon. Regardless, only a few years after the bombs dropped, the vault was filled only with children. The children were then raised by robots of the vault, who raised them by only teaching them tribal knowledge from humanity's past. Vault-Tec's experiment was to see how a group of people who had no memory or record of the technological advances of humanity would survive in a post-apocalyptic wasteland. However, Vault-Tec's experiment was thwarted. A woman named Diana, who before the war had merged with a computer, took over the robots of Vault 29 and kept the vault doors from opening. In so doing, she allowed the children to grow up and then have their own children. Many generations passed in Vault 29, and during that time, Diana sent robots out into the wasteland to create a city for the descendants of Vault 29 to live. On the fateful day when she opened the doors, the residents of Vault 29 emerged to find a new home built for themselves, and here they established a tribe called the Twin Mothers. The Twin Mothers was a matriarchal society, and the only reason I mention it here is because the Twin Mothers are canon. The Twin Mothers were mentioned by Ulysses during the Lonesome Road DLC.
Mojave's got ways of healing most ills. If not, some tribes are usually found a way you didn't expect, like healing powders. Tribes back west only use xander and rock flour. There's a way the twin mothers in the east used to brew it, though. Cures a wound, leaves the bitterness that caused it. The twin mothers were always about lessons. Caesar taught them the last one, though. So that's it for them.
Though tragically, their fate is also set in stone. The twin mothers were eventually consumed by the Legion. Harold was born in 2072, making him only 5 years old when the nuclear apocalypse happened in 2077. He was one of the children who grew up in Vault 29. But in the year 2090, the robots of Vault 29 removed him from the vault by force under the pretense of sending him out into the wasteland to see if it was ready for habitation. But he would never return to Vault 29. This was all part of Diana's plot to convince the residents of Vault 29 that the wasteland was not yet suitable for reclamation, which encouraged them to stay within the safety of Vault 29. Harold was taken to Diana, and Diana gave him the option to either stay with her forever or leave Vault 29 to explore the wasteland. However, if he chose to leave and wander the wasteland, he would be conditioned before he left so that he wouldn't remember where he came from, thus protecting the location of Vault 29. He chose to stay with Diana, but he escaped. He chose to keep the existence of Diana and Vault 29 a secret, even after everything she did to him, because he didn't want any harm to come to them. And so he wandered the wasteland.
And I remember walking out of the vault late one morning.
Where was your vault located?
You know, I'm not real sure anymore. West, I think. Wait, east? Oh, I don't know.
He made a small fortune for himself being a caravaner, trading between the early communities that formed after the apocalypse.
I was a trader. Did pretty good making a circuit between survivors. Lost a lot of good people, though.
He worked this job for 12 years and eventually ended up at the hub, where he became one of the major caravan bosses. There, he met Richard Gray, an exile from Vault 8, but who had a great deal of medical knowledge and worked as a doctor.
God, Richard. Richard Gray. Richard Gray was a doctor. A little older than me, and friend was he smart.
But over time, life as a caravaner became more complicated, mainly due to increasing attacks by mutants from the wasteland.
Scavengers attacking the caravans, and mutants, son of a dog, if they weren't springing up like rabbits with a mission. Had to have an army of guards with just to do a deal.
By 2102, the attacks from mutants were so extreme that his business was significantly suffering, and Harold decided he needed to do something about it. On May 22nd, 2102, Harold left the hub with a group comprised of his friends Richard Gray, Mark, and Francine, with the goal of finding the source of the mutants that had been plaguing their caravans.
We mounted an expedition. Led a small group of us up there. Needed to see what was there. Maybe stop whatever was churning them boogers out. We thought we were prepared. Were we wrong?
Thanks to Richard Gray, they discovered that the source of the mutants was the Mariposa military base, and they began to explore it on June 23rd of that year.
He found the source. Some sort of old military base. We lost a lot of folks getting in there.
But as Harold tells us, their expedition ended in disaster.
We got pretty far inside. Wasn't a lot of us left by then. Gray, me, and a couple of others. One of them robots got Francine. Mark was wounded. Sent him back to the surface. Then, it was just me and Gray. We made it to some sort of central core, like a plant of some sort. That's when it happened. A robot crane crashed into us. Last I saw Gray, he was flying through the air and into some sort of acid bath. I was in bad shape and, well, I passed out.
After discovering Richard Gray's audio diary, we learn what happened to him. He was thrown into a vat of FEV, and he mutated into the Master. Harold likewise was exposed to FEV, and he began to mutate, but in a strange way.
I got mutated. Sure wasn't born this ugly.
And here's where the nature of Harold becomes rather perplexing. We know that people who are exposed to FEV typically mutate into supermutants. But the Master didn't mutate into a supermutant, and Harold didn't mutate into a supermutant. Instead, Harold looks like a ghoul. So what is he? Is he an FEV mutant or a ghoul? Well, the best answer we can get comes from the Fallout Bible. Inside we find a discussion between the developers of Fallout 1. And some, including Tim Kaine and Chris Taylor, insist that Harold is a ghoul, but they concede that he is a very special ghoul. But they distinguish Harold, an FEV ghoul, from the ghouls of the necropolis, ghouls who were transformed by the war radiation. The war radiation mutated people into ghouls. In essence, all ghouls are mutants, but not all mutants are ghouls. Supermutants are mutants because they were infected with FEV. Ghouls are also mutants after being exposed to the war radiation. But even here, the developers can't quite pin down exactly what Harold is. They routinely describe him as being special, set apart, something different, and they don't define what that is. They sum it up really well with one sentence. Harold is Harold, and Harold is special.
All I know is it was something inside that base.
So, Richard Gray gets dunked in FEV and turns into the Master. Francine and Mark are killed and never seen again. Harold gets exposed to FEV at the Mariposa military base and passes out. 4 days later, on June 27th, some traders stumble upon him and take him back to the hub.
Woke up in the wasteland, barely hanging on. Got lucky, and some traders I knew found me days later. Good thing, since I was already changing. They brought me here, and here I've been since.
Where he stays, hoping upon hope that Mark will one day return, but he never does.
To this day, I don't know. He never made it back here, and, well, I couldn't face the wasteland again, so I never looked.
We find Harold a beggar in the hub because after the events of the Mariposa military base, his caravan business was destroyed. As a mutant, he began receiving harassment from regular humans in the hub.
You're as bad as the rest of them.
But at least he was respected by some members of the hub as being the source of a wealth of wasteland knowledge, including being one of the only people to have seen a Deathclaw and lived to talk about it.
Friend, that is Nightmare City. That's like a damn big man is what it is. Got spikes and claws that can cut through the heaviest armor. But don't let the size fool you. It's quick.
At some point after the events of Fallout 1, Harold decided to leave the hub. But where he went next is open to debate. It's possible that Harold traveled over 1,700 miles east into the Midwest to participate in the events of Fallout Tactics. 36 years after the events of Fallout 1, in the year 2197, we find a community of ghouls in the ruins of Kansas City, living in a town that they have called Gravestone. These ghouls worship an atomic bomb that they call plutonius. But there's some cut content to this city that ties back into Harold. The religion that the community here at Gravestone practice is based on a prophecy written by someone named Saint Harold of the Leafy Scalp. This prophecy commanded the ghouls at Gravestone to be pacifists and to not fight other people in the wasteland, which of course became a problem during the events of Fallout Tactics when Gamoran and his super mutant army invaded the town of Gravestone, trying to get their hands on the nuclear bomb Plutonius. Now, we don't know if this Saint Harold is the same Harold we know and love from the hub, but ultimately it doesn't matter because this prophecy was cut from the game. But what wasn't cut from the game is Harold himself. If we support the ghouls at Quincy and the ghouls join the Brotherhood recruit pool, then after the Marden mission, a new ghoul arrives in the recruit pool named Harold. The bio of this Harold describes him as an explosives expert, which doesn't really sound much like the Harold we know from the hub. Additionally, his character portrait doesn't look like Harold at all. However, he is over 100 years old, like Harold from the hub, and uniquely, he has a bit of a tree branch growing out of his head. He also has the bonsai perk, where the branch on his head periodically produces fruit. Coincidences are starting to stack up. It's a coincidence that the prophet who gave a community of ghouls a prophecy happened to be named Harold. It's a coincidence that a ghoul who shows up in the Brotherhood recruit pool in the Midwest is also named Harold. And it's a coincidence that this Harold has a tree growing out of his head. Because 44 years later, in the year 2241, all the way back on the West Coast in California, we find Harold again. This time, he's the leader of a community of ghouls called Gecko.
Hello there, smooth skin. The name's Harold. I help keep this town running.
Living in the ruins of Poseidon Reactor number 5. And by this time, Harold has a tree growing out of his head.
Jealous? His name's Herbert. I talk to him when I get lonely. Just kidding. His name's Bob.
Fallout Tactics is only considered to be semi-canonical. There are some problems with the lore in that game, but there are a lot of things that happen in Fallout Tactics that are referred to in subsequent Fallout games. It's debatable whether or not the Harold we find in Tactics is the same Harold from the hub. But what's not debatable is that he never went to Carbon, Texas, which is where the events of Fallout Brotherhood of Steel take place. That game takes place in the year 2208, after the events of Fallout Tactics. And in that game, we find Harold, and his story is a bit of a mess. He loses body parts and limbs, and we have to run around a map and find them. But Bethesda has explicitly rejected Fallout Brotherhood of Steel from the greater Fallout canon. So even though he does appear in the game, it's likely that Harold never went to Carbon, Texas. Which brings us back to Gecko. Harold has been here at Gecko for quite some time. He arrived in 2238. He decided to help the ghouls because even though the ghouls here got the reactor working, they weren't exactly the brightest bulbs in the batch.
Our atomic reactors are mighty sensitive. The people I got running it mean well, but, well, they are not the sharpest tools in the shed, if you know what I mean. I mean, they are not too bright. Here's an example. The other day, I get a report. On it, it says the main coolant valve should be shut down. That would have caused a meltdown. That would make the Grand Canyon look like a pig wallah. Now, I got things fixed up in time, but we came close to the end there. Whew. They need someone to watch out for them.
And so Harold took up leadership of this community to try and prevent any horrible disaster. The problem is that the ghouls here have been suffering a lot of prejudice from humans in the wasteland, a type of prejudice that Harold at this point in his life is very familiar with.
Those creatures, they cannot be trusted.
The nuclear reactor is contaminating the groundwater, but the groundwater is being used by nearby societies, including Vault City.
There's a town. It is filled with creatures that are polluting the groundwater with dangerous radiation. Those things are operating a damaged atomic power plant. You see, they are immune to radiation. They don't care that they are slowly killing us with their poisons.
Harold asked the ghouls to figure out what they needed to fix this problem. They told him that they needed a new hydroelectric magnetosphere regulator.
Without a functional hydroelectric magnetosphere regulator, we are leaking radioactive coolant into the groundwater. Now that means anyone using that water is not gonna need a nightlight to take a midnight piss.
Thing is, Vault City has a hydroelectric magnetosphere regulator.
Well, I'm certain those ornery bastards in Vault City have one. Not that they'd share.
But Harold can't go to them and ask for it, even though fixing the plant would help them as well as the ghouls at Gecko, because the people of Vault City shoot ghouls on sight.
They shoot ghouls on sight. Makes conversation a bit tricky.
Here the Chosen One steps in to try and resolve this problem to benefit both the ghouls at Gecko and the humans at Vault City. But it's here where Harold reveals himself to be a little bit more politically savvy than one would expect. One of the ghouls at Gecko, Gordon, has a bunch of economic data that he wants Harold to share with Vault City. Vault City has medical supplies that the ghouls need, and the ghouls have excess energy that Vault City needs. Gordon believes that if Harold shares the economic data with Vault City, that it'll convince them to agree to a trade. However, Harold demonstrates his political savvy by realizing that if they share this economic data, Vault City will realize that Gecko is getting all of their uranium to power the nuclear plant from the nearby town of Broken Hills.
Economic data? You didn't give them that information that Gordon keeps flapping his yap about, did you? Now Vault City knows just how much we need uranium ore from Broken Hills. They could cut off them shipments and we'd be finished.
Which means that if Vault City were to somehow simply cut off the supply line between Gecko and Broken Hills, they could force Gecko into a worse bargaining position. And if the Chosen One shares this economic data, Harold gets really upset.
What a bonehead. Get the hell out, now!
We also learn that Harold became pretty good friends with the Vault Dweller from Fallout 1.
Had a lot of respect for that one. Yeah, to be honest, can't remember the name. But they wore a funny suit, kinda like the one you're wearing.
We don't know if Harold ever learned that Richard Gray became the Master, but he did understand the danger that the Master posed to the wasteland. And he recognized what the Vault Dweller did by defeating the Master.
You know, your ancestors saved the whole darn lot of us. All of us saved every two-legged shuffler on the dang planet. And what happened next? For a thank you, the damn high and mighty Vaulties booted the Vault Dweller out. I always wondered what happened after that.
However, since Harold never learned exactly what happened to the Vault Dweller, the Chosen One, being a descendant of the Vault Dweller, can give Harold the rest of the story.
Well, thanks for telling. I sure was curious all these years. You got your work cut out for you.
But Harold couldn't stay in one place for very long. After a while, Harold and Bob decided to move east. Bob was continuing to grow. The tree in Harold's head began to get larger, and Bob started to produce fruit. The fruit would fall to the ground as Harold traveled the wasteland, and the seeds within would take root. Harold left a trail of saplings behind him as he moved across the continental United States. As Harold marched across the wastes, Bob began to take over. One day after arriving in the capital wasteland, in the ruins of Washington, D.C., sometime in the 2250s, he decided to stop for a rest. But after resting, he discovered that he couldn't move anymore. Bob had taken root. Harold was now firmly planted in the ground.
See, Bob used to ride around on top of my head. Sunk his roots right in there, you know. Well, eventually he got bigger than me, and then I pretty much ended up inside. You see, I've been stuck here for over 2 decades now, rooted right into the ground. The only friends I've got are Bob and those weirdos out there who think I'm a god.
There, Harold transformed into a being unlike anything else that ever walked the earth. What exactly is Bob? Harold talks to Bob, but we don't get the impression that Bob actually has its own consciousness, because Bob never talks back.
Well, I talked to Herbert, but he never really says anything back. Do you, Herbert?
I think that Harold just gets lonely, which is why he came up with this ridiculous naming game between he and Bob, calling him such a derisive name as Herbert.
He kept growing around me. Maybe for calling him Herbert all the time. His name's really Bob. I think it's funny when I call him Herbert, though. We're old pals, the best of buddies, and we know each other inside and out. Literally. Herbert is the tree. Bob is his real name, but I call him Herbert because I think it's pretty funny. But I'm still in here too. What's left of me? The name's Harold.
Harold has given personhood to this thing growing out of him, because for most of his wandering life he's been pretty lonely, and it's been a way to pass the time. But where did Bob come from? Did he somehow originate within Harold and burst forth? Or was Bob in the Mariposa military base and attached himself to Harold when Harold first got infected, burrowing deep inside Harold until he took root and began to grow out of his head? Or could Bob be some sort of post-apocalyptic parasite that Harold contracted after he left the hub? Perhaps a parasite that only infects mutants or ghouls. We don't really know. Like the Fallout Bible says, Harold is just Harold, and everything about him is weird. But Bob really did act like a parasite. Bob began to disassemble Harold's body, pushing his internal organs deep underground, tucking them away in the nooks and crannies of subterranean caves.
I think Bob's kinda shoved my insides around some. It's hard to tell where everything is, but it's always that way with one's insides, isn't it? Anyway, I believe Bob's carried some of my organs into his root system.
Harold might not have minded being stuck in place so much, except for the fact that one day, a wanderer stumbled upon him and decided that Harold was a being to be worshipped. He called Harold the Great One and formed a cult around Harold called the Tree Minders.
I'm Tree Father Birch, and I have the great fortune of being the leader of his people, the Tree Minders. The Great One is a god tree. Who else but a god could produce all of this? He is the one who grows, he is the one who gives, and he is the one who guides. No one speaks his name out of reverence for his majesty. Thanks to him, the Tree Minders have a home.
Here, Harold and Bob flourished. A grove of trees sprouted up around them, creating an oasis in the wasteland. And this oasis keeps growing.
Everything you see around you, from the tallest tree to the smallest blade of grass, is a gift from him.
In what we call the harvest month, the Great One creates seeds among his branches within seed pods. At the end of this time, the pods open and the seeds are carried quite easily upon the wind. It's quite beautiful. Wherever the seeds take purchase, they grow into trees, plants, grass, or all manner of wonderful things.
Once a year, Bob decides he's gonna go ahead and start growing these weird pods filled with tiny seeds. Well, all it takes is a good wind and the seeds just fly everywhere. I call them Herbert's seeds. He hates that.
The innocent creatures are drawn here by his gifts. They come from across the wasteland to live in this sanctuary. This part of the world is healing, my friend, and it's all thanks to him.
The tree minders were able to use the unique flora that's sprung up here in the oasis to create medicines and potions, some that had miraculous curative properties.
Bloomseer poplar has a unique understanding of the innate power that lay dormant in the plants you see around you.
The liniment was made by Bloomseer poplar. Her knowledge of his gifts and how they can be used to help us is nothing short of astounding.
I was found dying in the wastes not far from here by a trader caravan. They knew about this place and brought me to Bloomseer poplar. She nursed me back to health, and I've stayed ever since.
And somehow, Harold was able to use the far-flung branches and leaves in this forest to see distant places in the wasteland.
Maybe I'm just losing my mind from all this boredom, but I swear if I try, I can see all around me. Like my eyes are in every leaf, on every tree. I think it's making Bob kinda jealous, 'cause he was the first tree in my life, and all that.
But the tree minders' cult around him grew. The cult would recruit new members by forcing them to drink this weird concoction.
To meet him, you must undergo the ceremony of purification. You drink the sap from the basin here in the pavilion. The sap will purify your mind and body of anything harmful that could possibly hurt him.
They make them drink this gunk that Poplar makes. Sometimes they just go nuts and start running around. And sometimes when they wake up and see me, they run for the hills.
And these cult members annoyed him. They were constantly pestering him.
No, don't get me started on them. I'm liable to talk about them all day. It even drives poor old Bob crazy. They won't listen to me at all. If I tell them something simple, then it gets done. Otherwise, Birch spends a week looking for a hidden meaning. Plus, he just pops in whenever he wants and starts chanting this nonsense. Sometimes I just sit there silently just to make him mad. That was fun for a while, but even that's getting boring now.
Really, there was only one member of the community that he could stand, a young child named you.
Actually, the kid is the nicest one of all. Yu's her name. She sneaks in here sometimes and just lets me talk about stuff I wanna talk about. Bob really likes her too, 'cause she makes me happy.
Sometimes when I get really lonely, I go into the grove and talk to him. Sometimes I even curl up all cozy-like and sleep next to his root after I have a bad dream. I tell him what I'm scared of, and he tells me what he's scared of. It makes me feel better knowing I'm not the only one.
And mainly that was because you would sit and listen to Harold's stories, instead of treating him like a god. When the Lone Wanderer stumbles upon Harold in the oasis in the year 2277, Harold has only one request of the Lone Wanderer, and that is to end his suffering.
I had you brought in here to ask a very simple favor. Would you please kill me? It wouldn't be murder. You'd be doing me a favor. I've been literally rooted to this spot, thanks to Bob, for maybe 20 or 30 years. I can't even remember anymore. Can you imagine being stuck in one place for that long? Not being able to eat or to read or to sleep or anything? In the meantime, I have these tree minders bothering me every day about things I don't even care about. And I can't stand it anymore. I've tried to stay happy. Really, I have. Bloomseer Poplar thinks I'll live for hundreds of years. Maybe even more. Can you imagine that? Stuck here for centuries? I can't do it. I just want to be alone. Just me and Bob until the end. I want you to go underground and destroy my heart. I don't want to wait until the next person visits. It could be years. You're all I've got. Just think about it, okay?
Ultimately, we don't know what the Lone Wanderer decided to do upon discovering Harold. If the Wanderer decided that Harold was more useful to the wasteland alive, he can either coat Harold's heart in a substance that restricts its growth, limiting the spread of Harold's forest, keeping Harold to the tree minders alone forever, or coating his heart with a liniment that causes his forest to grow even faster, accelerating the restoration of the wasteland. Or the Lone Wanderer could have killed Harold in a very painful way by burning him to death. Or the Wanderer could have done what Harold asked and gone into the caves below, found his heart, and destroyed it. Harold doesn't appear in Fallout 4. We don't know what his canonical ending is. But he does make an appearance in Fallout Shelter Online. Fallout Shelter Online was released only to Asia markets, and it takes place between the events of Fallout 3 and Fallout 4. In that game, Harold is alive, giving us the impression that the Lone Wanderer forced him to stay alive. However, we don't know if the events of Fallout Shelter Online are canonical or not. Bethesda has been mum on the issue. But since that particular game includes characters from other Bethesda IPs, including Doom and the Elder Scrolls, I don't think it's a canonical Fallout game. But I'd love to hear what you think. Do you think Harold, as he appears in Fallout Brotherhood of Steel, Fallout Tactics, and Fallout Shelter Online, should be included in his story? Do you think the Lone Wanderer should put Harold out of his misery, as Harold asks, or leave Harold alive to make the wasteland a better place? And what do you think of Harold's great odyssey? Why do you think he was so restless that he moved around so much? Let me know your thoughts in the comments section below. I'm always publishing new videos on this channel, so if you don't want to miss one, be sure to subscribe. But more than anything, as always, thanks for watching.